Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Repeateron, and today we're going to be doing another Deep Rock Galactic tier list. This time we're going to be going back over all the enemies with the new enemies added in, and my opinions have changed since the last list that we did of these. So let's talk about each of them. We have a few variants of some of the bugs. We don't have all the bugs up here, especially none of the non-hostile wildlife, and none of the like the plants that can injure you, like the cactuses, the mushrooms. I don't think we have, we don't even have the maggots up here, which two of them can injure you. So they are not in this list. These are all the enemies that are going to be trying to attack you, at least coming to you to attack you, unlike some of the other enemies. Well, I mean, I guess one of them doesn't really, well, two of them don't really go anywhere to attack you. Regardless, let's talk about this. Our very first enemy that we have is Betsy with the charge suckers attached to him. Now, Betsy can be pretty difficult to fight because Betsy's got the grenades that do very high damage to you. She's got the gun that can really shred you down in just a few seconds. And she's got the shield where she's invulnerable to damage, at least from the outside. But if you get inside the shield, then you can damage her. Or you can at least damage the suckers, I guess. That being said, the suckers are not that big a deal with certain weapons. The hyper-propellant grenade launcher can easily take them out super fast. Just the grenade launcher in general can. Same with the breach cutter. The smart rifle can. The M1000 can with scout. Let's see, the revolver can do pretty high damage. Driller, I mean, you have your axes, so you do have that as far as burst damage. Otherwise, you don't really have tons of burst damage towards it. But you could slow it down with the new goo gun. The corrosive sludge pump, you could slow it down with the freezing gun. You could slow it down, I guess, with the flamethrower too. You could slow it down quite a bit and help out the team. The Sabata would probably be your best option if you wanted to do actual direct damage, unless you're running like Icicle Spear on your cryo cannon. So you do have some options to fight her. She's usually not too bad as long as you're not fighting her with crowds. If you're just fighting her by herself and you have a not terrible area to be fighting in, then she can be pretty manageable. And then once you do beat her, then you get her, you can fix her, have her fight for you, and then she completely destroys bugs. At least she does now. There was a point a couple, I think maybe a month ago, where there was a bug that she just wouldn't do anything. She would just stand there, which was real unfortunate. So Betsy, in terms of an enemy, I think I'm going to put her up into A tier because she is pretty difficult. I don't think she's quite S tier. I don't think she's kind of like one of the boss enemies. She can kind of feel that way, especially if you just get unlucky and you get like a swarm, as well as there was another group of enemies that you stumbled into and then you stumble upon them. But that kind of goes with everything. The parasites. These little things are only available on the parasite difficulty modifier. So this one makes it whenever there is, whenever you kill an enemy, at least a large enemy, it has to be at least a grunt or bigger, then it will die, and it will spit out at least one of these. It can spit out to 3 of them if it's inside of a Pretorian, and then these will try to attack you. They don't move very fast, but they move very erratically. They can be a little bit difficult to shoot with certain classes. They're very easy to kill with Gunner and with Driller because you just have so good AoE weapons. And Engineer doesn't really have that much trouble either because their turrets will likely kill them. Scout can be difficult unless you're running like the new Drac rifle, and then it's not too bad. These ones, I mean, I guess they're D tier because them by themselves are not that difficult. It's when you kill a whole bunch of enemies and you're trying to reload, and then a bunch of these come and swarm you and maybe take your shields out, or you forget that you have parasites, and you just immediately kill something, turn to fight something else, and then you get swarmed by maybe up to 3 of these, which injures you and does damage over time. They aren't that big of a deal. It's probably one of the easier modifiers, I would say, for the difficulty ones, because at most they're probably just going to eat up more of your ammo, and in some cases they won't even do that, because if you're using like the flamethrower, they'll probably just die to the fire that you already put down. They don't have very much health. They only have 10 health, so pretty much everything kills them with one shot. Then we got the Cave Leech, which Cave Leeches by themselves, I mean, if you see them, they're no threat at all. If you're running Heightened Senses, again, they're no threat at all. If you have a scout that's lighting up the area, they're probably not as big a threat unless you're getting swarmed again, and then you might get grabbed. If you have teammates following close, they're not really that big a deal either. And if you're playing solo and Bosco's paying attention or is following close to you, he'll probably kill it before it can really injure you. That being said, leeches usually kill a decent amount of dwarves whenever I stream. Like, if we have somebody that wanders off by themselves, that's a really good time for them to get grabbed by a leech and die. I mean, in one hand, they're probably one of the most annoying enemies, especially if you don't come prepared with like heightened senses. That's why I run it pretty much all the time on my scout, and when I run it a lot in solo, in any of my solo videos, you'll see me run it pretty often. So cave leeches, they are a threat. I think I'm going to put them up into A tier as well. Then we have the bow wasp nests. These only appear in the hollow bow, so they're restricted to just that. They are rather tanky. They actually do have a lot of health. And they'll throw out the little wasp, which will attack you. That's pretty annoying. Let's group the Deep Tora honeycomb in there as well. They have the same amount of health, but these actually have a weakness to fire. So you can burn them pretty fast. They'll send out a bunch of little bugs to swarm you too. If you're playing like Driller, you take care of the bugs super fast. You can kill these from a distance to where they won't throw out bugs at you. They're pretty easy to spot, and they don't move. So the only real way that you're running into them is either they're right at the entrance of a new room that you wandered into and now you're getting swarmed, or you were just running away from like a horde or something trying to reposition and then these started swarming you. So again, they're not that big a deal, and I think I'd put both of them down into D tier just because they are so situational. They're only on the Sandblast Cavern, this one, and on the Hollow Bow. So if you're not going to those maps, you don't have to worry about them. And even on those maps, you usually don't really need to worry about them. I don't think I've ever died to these before. I've been swarmed and, hurt and probably had my shield broken, but I don't think I've ever, died. I don't think I've ever had a death directly attributed to these, I should say. Then we move on to one of our big boys here. This is the Hive Guard, which, I guess I have to put the Dreadnoughts up into S tier in terms of enemies because they are probably they're probably the strongest enemy in the game or enemy type in the game. The thing is, though, is that you're usually just fighting them by themselves. You're not fighting them with hordes, usually. Sometimes it does happen, but not usually. And same with, you're usually not fighting multiple Dreadnoughts at the same time. Again, usually, unless you're going for that achievement, or you're just not very coordinated with the team and the team starts up 2 Dreadnoughts to fight. That's happened to me before. That was interesting. So I guess I have to put it up there. The Hive Guard themselves is not one of the more difficult bosses, I would say, because he's probably the most fair in terms of the Dreadnoughts. He doesn't have anything can one-shot you easily. Only if he gets within pretty much melee range can he one-shot you. He does send out his guards, which the guards aren't too bad to kill. They do leave that goo behind, which can be annoying, but it works on everything, so works on enemies as well as friends. If you do get caught in that, then you could potentially die. Then he's got the fleshy parts that come out. You shoot them, which isn't that bad. And then he's just got the power-up phase where he pretty much just tries to melee and you can just shoot him in the back. He feels like he's probably, at least for me, the easiest of the Dreadnoughts, at least consistently. Depends on which weapons I'm using and what class I'm using and all that. But I feel like the Hive Guard is the most fair that I've fought. I consistently can beat him and that he's not super strong. So I think he's going to be on the low end of S tier. The Ice Praetorian is only in the ice area. They spit out ice instead of the acid, which still does damage to you. I don't know if it does the same amount of damage. These are weak to fire, just like everything in the ice area would be, or at least everything ice specific would be. They still die and then leave the ice behind, although the ice doesn't deal damage to you. So that makes them a little bit easier to fight, I guess, than the regular Praetorians. Usually these guys are just pretty big bullet sponges. They've got a lot of health, but that's about it. They don't move particularly fast. They can do high damage to you if they are allowed to get close and start spitting on you or hit you. They're usually not too bad, and I think I'd probably put them up into B tier. Again, also they're restricted to the ice zone, so you could put them lower because if you're not playing on the ice zone very often, then you don't have to worry about them that much. Up next, we got the Acid Spitter, which the Acid Spitter is pretty dangerous, especially on the high difficulties. If the Acid Spitter hits you, even if you have higher shields, it will still break your shield and will deal health damage. That's just with one spit of the acid hitting you, which is pretty common for them to hit you with at least one of them because you're likely not going to know where they are. They are kind of that dark red, so they can sometimes blend into the darkness, which makes them potentially dangerous. Usually on the lower difficulties, these aren't so bad because you're not getting a whole lot of them. Usually you're getting 1 to 2 of them that spawn at a time, but when you're playing on Hazard 5, you can get up to 5 or 6 of them to spawn at a time. And if they're all spitting at somebody, pretty much if just 2 of them hits you, you're probably going to die. If you're playing Shield Disruption, then I think if you're not running health and you didn't get something like Red Rock Blasters, this will kill you after 1 or 2 hits. I don't know. Maybe it might be 2 hits if you're at full health, completely full health. But if you're missing any major health, then it will kill you just with 1 hit. So that's pretty bad, as well as it has damage over time, so it takes even longer for your shield to come up. These ones are usually one of the bigger threats on the higher difficulties. I don't know if I'd put them into S tier, because they're not really like a boss enemy, similar to how the Praetorians are kind of, not the Praetorians, the Dreadnoughts are going to fit up there. They are one of the most dangerous, though, for just the general fighting, and you're definitely going to fight these way more often, unless you're only doing Dreadnought missions. So I guess I'd put them up there. Then we've got the Nexus. The Nexus itself is not really that big of a deal, because it's not going to fight back. It's just a big bullet sponge, and once you break it, then all the little spawns come out, and they'll try to attack you. Spawns have 5 HP, so they're one of the lowest things, and I think everything in the game will do 5 damage. So they're pretty easy to kill. There is going to be a good amount of them, though, so if they do swarm you, they could kill you fast. And this isn't a constant annoyance, because it will just keep spawning enemies out that hit you, so you do want to take care of it. If you freeze it, though, then kill it, then all the little ones will be dead inside. You can also just throw fire at it. If you got like a grenade or the flamethrower, you can kill them pretty quick that way. So they're not usually that big a deal, at least once you can get to them, and once you've dealt with pretty much everything else around the area, because they're going to be like the very low tier threats. So I'm going to put them into C tier, because they are annoying. They are an annoyance, but they're not a huge threat. Then we've got the Bulk Detonator, which I guess I would also put him up into S tier, even though the Bulk Detonator is usually not a killer for like a competent team. If you freeze them and then shoot them, they'll die. You can kill them pretty quick once they are frozen. And if you do kill them when they're frozen, then they don't blow up and blow up the area. They do still kind of blow up and knock everybody away, but that's not a big deal so long as you're not standing next to cliffs or something, in which case gravity will kill you. It seems like they have increased the spawn rates of detonators. Whenever I've been streaming this, people have been telling me that too since the last like major update. It seems like everybody's getting more detonators, which I don't know if they did that in response of like the bunker strategy that people were using, which is a pretty boring strategy to use, and it's not one that I like to use. And detonators do counter that strategy. It's just that strategy isn't a super safe strategy to use too. So maybe that's the reason why they did that. The detonator can pretty much one-shot you regardless of who you are or what build you're running, at least on Hazard 5. I think there is a few exceptions to that where you can build to where you won't get one-shot, but yeah, it's usually best not to stand near the detonator, and they're going to eat up a whole lot of ammo because they are pretty tanky. Oh, and they can also potentially ruin certain missions, like escort missions are pretty bad when you get multiple detonators that are just running after Doretta. That isn't good, especially if you just go through a wall and one spawns there and it blows up part of Doretta. That's not good either. There is also not the Crassus detonator here, which the Crassus detonator is very similar to the regular detonator, but I believe it has more armor, and when it dies, then it explodes into gold. So you don't want to be freezing these ones. You want to draw them into a tunnel, and you want to blow it up. That way you can get the gold. It's very easy to get all the gold, too, if you're playing like Driller, and you got C4, and you do C4 mining, or if you're using the EPC with its mining. That can really help. Or if you don't have any of that, but maybe you're running Berserker, you could mine a little bit quicker for a short time. Then we've got the Twins, which once again, I'm going to put the Twins up into S tier. The Twins are probably the most difficult, or at least the Dreadnought that gives me the most trouble, because they can be kind of unpredictable, and you are usually focusing on one while the other one might be repositioning to attack you. There's one that gets up close and starts meleeing you, at least it tries to. It tries to run up melee you. It's also got its jagged spike things that it throws out, which is pretty cool, but pretty easy to avoid once you've understood it. Either you have to go in between them, or you just have to go outside the area of where they're attacking, and then you're fine. It can also breathe fire. That's a more difficult one to get away from, because it usually likes to do it when it's real close. You can run past it and then try to get behind it to shoot it, or you can run off to one of the sides. The ranged one will try to just constantly spit explosives at you, and can fire out quite a few fireballs at you. It also gets stronger. Well, either one of them gets stronger, whichever one dies. There's also the part where if you've been hurting one too much, then they'll go and become invulnerable and then split health so that they're both to the same amount of HP, which I think before, I'm pretty sure there was an update before this where the twins' health wasn't exactly the same. It wasn't exactly split. It seems like if you knocked one down low, then it would kind of equalize, but there'd still be more health overall. So it kind of encouraged fighting both of them at the same time. But I know also when the twins, at least when the twins were like that they used to bury a lot more. So sometimes one of them just wouldn't be around for very long, and then it would burrow to safety and you could only fight one, which did make them pretty annoying. Then we've got the original Dreadnought. Once again, another S tier. The original Dreadnought's probably the one that gives me the second most trouble. He is very straightforward, but his melee range can be deceptively long. Sometimes you just get hit where it seems like there would be no way that he hits you, but I guess he can. He can also spit the fire at you, which does high damage and breaks the ground, as well as it summons all the little swarmers that come after you. And they'll be focused on whoever that it hit. Very strong and can give you trouble. He can also spawn in random missions too. It's not very likely, but there is a chance where a Dreadnought will spawn and try to attack you during other missions. And I don't know if it's always the regular Dreadnought. I think it has been for me, but I don't know if it could be the Hive Guard or the twins as well. If it is, then I have been kind of lucky in not getting these two, I guess. Up next, we got the Exploder. This is just the regular Exploder. These guys got low HP. They can just blow up, deal a bunch of damage to you, and kill you very fast, especially since when they spawn, sometimes you can get an entire wave that spawn, but they also can kill other bugs very well. So if you get an entire wave to spawn, especially if you're doing like Exploder infestation, you can use them to your advantage to kill enemies. So long as you're paying attention, usually don't have too many problems with these unless you get stuck in just a bad position and they swarm you and blow up, or they overrun your position and blow up. So kind of a threat, but not really if you're paying attention. I guess I'd put them on the low end of B tier. Then we've got our grunts here, and first up we got the regular grunt. The standard grunt is usually what you build for breakpoints. So the regular grunt has 108 HP on the highest difficulties. So 4 and 5, they have 108. That's body HP. So if you hit them in the head, then you're doing twice damage. So all you really need to do is about 55 damage, and you will one-shot them in the head, or 110 damage, and you'll body shot them, which is great for something like the M1000, which already hits both those numbers right away. Grunts aren't really that big of a threat by themselves. If it's just one grunt, any weapon can kill them, any build can kill them. I mean, you can do it really with any build, even if there's multiple of them. One grunt is not that big of a threat. Multiple grunts, which is probably the most common thing that you're going to be fighting, is waves and waves of grunts. Those can be a threat, because then you can start racking up pretty high damage. They can hurt you very easily. You could always grab one of these to make a Steve if you have Beastmaster, which is great. The regular grunt is kind of just the standard enemy, and I think I'd put them high up into B tier because you're going to be fighting them the most, but regular grunts by themselves are not usually the scariest thing in the game. They're just kind of the standard enemy. You get used to them. They're not so bad. Up next, though, we have the Slashers, which the Slashers are quite a bit tougher. Slashers go from the 108 HP up to 178 HP. So they have another 70 HP on them. They also have the ability to stun you, or at least it looks like they're stunning you. I guess the indicator on your screen. This slows you down a lot. They can do high damage, and you really don't want to get slowed down on the higher difficulties. If you get slowed down, that is really bad. This is why you see so many people take dash, because if they hit you with that, you can dash out of it, and usually the dash will get you to safety, as well as the dash lasts about as long as the slow debuff that they'll put on you. So you can kind of save yourself with that. If you don't have that, it can be rough. These ones usually cause a good amount of trouble. They're similar to the acid spitters, and they are more common than acid spitters. You see them in waves of grunts way more often than acid spitters usually, unless you just get real unlucky and get a whole bunch of acid spitters. So I guess I'd put these ones probably on the low end of S tier 2. I guess I'd put them above the acid spitters, because usually I'm more afraid of a bunch of slashers than a couple acid spitters. If there's a lot of acid spitters, that's a different story. And then we've got the guards, which the guards are really tanky. The guards are bullet sponges, sometimes more effective bullet sponges than like the Praetorians are. They've got the front armor that reduces damage by a lot, and their total health is 324 on the highest difficulty, so they have a bunch of health. That makes them pretty difficult to deal with. They are really good if you want to make them into a Steve, though, because they are tanky and they'll retain that armor unless that armor gets destroyed from other effects, whether they got hit by a different bug or whether you hit them before turning them into a Steve. So they can lose that armor. These ones I'd probably put on the high end of A tier. I don't think they're as bad as the slashers are usually. They're definitely a challenge. They're worse than the regular grunts. And usually on like Has 5, you don't just see a wave of one of these types at a time. There's usually almost always mixed in with one another. Then we've got menaces. Menaces are probably the most annoying enemy in this game. They do really high damage. They have very long range. They pretty much have aimbot on them and wall hacks. They know exactly where you are and will just keep shooting at you. If you're in a group, they're not as bad. In solo, they are awful. Especially if there's multiple of them. Even in a group, multiple of them are just terrible because they can burst you down very fast. They don't do as much damage per hit as the acid spitters, but they can hit you way quicker than the acid spitters and potentially down you faster. So they are just so annoying. I'm going to put them also into S tier. I think they're on the low end because I still think things like slashers and acid spitters are way more common and going to be more of an issue. But the menaces are just so annoying when they do actually show up. Okay, then we've got the Oppressor. The Oppressor usually isn't too big of a deal, at least by himself. It's mostly when he's mixed in with other enemies is when he can cause you problems because he does cause a lot of disruption. He is very weak to melee attacks, so like the Driller's axes kill him very fast. Pickaxe's attacks, at least power attacks to his back, do really high damage. He does have unbreakable armor, which can be rather annoying. Depending on which weapon you're using. It's not a huge deal if you're using pretty much any of Driller's weapons, or if you get behind him and start hitting him in the back. If you're using like the Seeker rounds with the Loki, not an issue then either. But he's just going to be a bullet sponge. He's going to be more of a bullet sponge than the Praetorians are. He can potentially do more damage than the Praetorians, but he's got very short reach with his slam attack, and then with his ranged attack where he's knocking up the ground and hitting you into the air. It's pretty easy to avoid that too. Again, so long as the ground is at least okay. If the ground isn't great, it can be annoying where he can just fling you around and potentially kill you from the gravity. So Dreadnoughts, Oppressors, I'd probably put them on the low end of A tier. They are pretty much just an upgraded Praetorian. Once you get used to fighting them, though, they're not that bad. Like I said, Driller can kill them real fast. Scout can kill them real fast because you can just easily maneuver around them. And then we've got the regular Praetorians. These are just like the Ice Praetorians, but these ones spit out the acid that does damage over time. When they die, they leave the cloud behind that deals damage to you. It's also flammable, so if it gets caught on fire, it will deal damage to everything around it. Which can be useful. Usually these are just kind of bullet sponges, the same thing that we talked about with the ice ones. You're going to find them more often, so I guess I'd put them above the ice ones just because they're everywhere besides the ice area. Well, in the radioactive area. But, yeah, I think I'd just put them there. Then we've got Swarmers. Swarmers by themselves, again, are just like grunts, but, well, they're way weaker than grunts because these guys only have 15 HP at the highest difficulties, so you can usually one-shot them with just about every weapon, and AoE weapons completely destroy even the largest hordes of Swarmers. That is going to be where they're the scariest, though, is where there is very large hordes, because then they can pile on you and do very high damage very quickly. These can be potentially really dangerous. They also can potentially not be that bad at all. If you're playing Driller, all of your weapons do really well against crowds. If you're playing Gunner, pretty much all of your weapons do really well against crowds. So if you're playing those two classes, not a big deal. If you got turret set up as engineer, they're also usually not too bad. Or if you got the new explosive chemical rounds, or if you're running Inferno or just anything on the breach cutter, you can clear waves of them, no problem. Scout has usually the most issues unless you're running the new Drac, maybe with like bouncy rounds or something. Then they're not too bad. I think I'm going to put Swarmers up into B tier as well. Right next to Grunts, because again, it's kind of the same logic. If there's just a few Swarmers, you know, who cares? If there's waves of Swarmers, they can easily eat through both your health, your armor, and your ammo very quickly because you're just trying to get rid of them. You can also counter them with some ways, like the incendiary grenade completely kills them. The freezing grenade also kills them instantly. Same with just freezing them in general will kill them. Any AoE weapon or any AoE overclock to your weapon will kill them very easily. So, I don't know. I guess I'd just put them there. Wardens can be pretty annoying. Wardens themselves aren't a big deal. If it's just a warden out by itself, you can just run over and kill it with your pickaxe because it's not going to fight back. But these do give shields to all enemies. If you're giving shields to things like Praetorians and Oppressors, that's really annoying. They're going to have a ton of HP, as well as if you give them to like guards, they're going to be really annoying. So I think for the annoyance factor, I'd put them to A tier, but they're usually not too scary. They're also not super common though. Even on the highest difficulty, it's kind of rare to see more than 2 or 3 wardens at a time. And even then, that's in like a big area where they spawn. They usually don't spawn with the hordes. Then we've got web spitters. Web spitters are not nearly as scary as acid spitters are. They're more annoying because they just kind of blind you. They do have much lower health though. If you can one-shot body shot a grunt, then you can definitely one-shot body shot a web spitter because they just don't have nearly as much HP. Even if you can just one-shot headshot a grunt, you will still be able to one-shot body shot a web spitter. So they're not that bad. They're also brightly colored, so they're usually more easy to see than some of the other ones. The webbing can be a bit annoying, so I could see these being put higher on some people's list, but for me, the web spitters usually aren't that bad, and I think I'd put them to the high end of C tier. They're more of an annoyance than necessarily a huge threat. They can be because they can web you and you can move slow then, which we've talked about how bad moving slow is, but usually I don't see more than a couple of these at a time. Usually no more than like 4 or 5 of them, as opposed to something like slashers where sometimes you might get 10 of them in a wave or something. Next, we got the Tyrant Weed, which I guess the Tyrant Weed also has to go up into S tier. It is pretty much a boss enemy. The weed itself is not going to hit you at all, but its sprouts will, where the sprouts will deal damage. They actually have a very long range and are quite accurate, and they have a lot of health, so that can be really annoying, and they'll spawn more of them, as well as they'll spawn the healing pods, which you have to kill. Otherwise, they'll keep healing the Tyrant Weed. Once you kill enough of those, it will open up, and then you can deal damage to it. And if you run up there and hit it with like pickaxes, certain other weapons like embedded detonators or the double barrel shotgun, just anything that does high damage at close range or high direct damage, you can kill them pretty quick then. But they're still pretty annoying, especially if you run into them in the middle of like an escort mission. That's usually the worst when that happens. All right, then it looks like we're moving on to the Mactera here. And our first one is the Brundlefly. So the Brundle is the tankiest of the group. Usually you don't see more than maybe 2 of these spawn though at a time. At least I don't really recall seeing ever more than like 2 of them. They're kind of a flying tank. They have armor on them. Once you break the armor on their belly, then their weak spot is exposed. You can deal damage to that. So you can also deal pretty high damage to any of the flying things with melee damage too. So if you hit them with the axes or hit them with your pickaxe, you can kill them pretty easily. This one has the most HP. This one's more of an annoyance, but I really don't see the Brundle being all that big of a threat most of the time. Just because there's not very many of them that spawn at a time. So I think I'm going to put this one into C tier, similar to the Web Spitter, where I see it as more of an annoyance. It can potentially be a bullet sponge too because of how much damage they can tank through. Then we have the Goo Bomber, both the regular Goo Bomber and the Ice Bomber. The Ice Bomber will spit out icicles that'll deal damage to you, and it will leave the ice goo down, which will slow you just like the regular goo, and it will build up your cold meter a little bit more. That can be kind of annoying. Goo Bombers can be an issue. Not really by themselves. They usually don't kill you. They usually don't do tons of damage to you. They can do decent damage to you, but they're usually not the thing that kills you. They're more of a support unit that slows you down, which in itself is annoying. I think I'd put these into B tier. Same with the regular Goo Bombers into B tier. Then we've got the Grabber here. The Grabber is kind of the same as the Leech, although the Grabber does give you a noise notification if a Grabber is nearby. You hear like the screaming noise that it has, or screeching noise, whatever the heck that noise is that it makes, before it will try to come and grab you, and then it'll carry you off. After a while, it'll drop you. It's completely random as to where it drops you. It doesn't try to bring you up way high and drop you. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it drops you on actually a better location than you were at. They're pretty easy to kill. They do have a decent amount of HP, but nothing too scary, I would say. I think I'm going to put these lower. I think I'll put these into C tier as well. The regular Magterra can be pretty annoying. They can do high damage. They're pretty evasive because of how quickly they can move. They can take some decent damage. They don't spawn in near as many numbers as like grunts do, or as often as grunts do, unless you get like a Magterra plague. So I think I'd still put them into B tier like the regular grunts. I guess I'd put them up here. Then you got the Trijaws. Trijaws are pretty dangerous. They can do very high damage very fast. They can hit you 3 times, which can one-shot you, or I guess 3-shot you. Usually there's more than one Trijaw. They spawn pretty often. They're pretty dangerous, I would say. I think I'd put these guys maybe at the top of A tier. Maybe low S tier, somewhere around there. Then we got the Breeder, which the Breeder itself, again, is like most of these things. It's very similar to like the Nexus. It's not a threat by itself, but when it's spawning the little hatchlings, the Jellyfish, those can be a threat because it will just keep making more and more of them. It'll spawn the roe egg, which you can kill, but that does have a decent amount of health. These guys have a lot of health, although they are susceptible to freezing. Same goes with all the flying enemies. Once you freeze them, they're just dead. So that means you can play somebody like Scout, zipline right up to them, throw a cryo grenade in their face, and kill them without any trouble. If you're playing some of the other classes, you don't get that option. If you're playing like Gunner, you can't freeze them. So I think I'd put these into C tier. It's kind of the same thing with the Nexus, although the Nexus doesn't move. This one does move, so it would be higher than the Nexus in my opinion. Then we've got the Jellyfish. Jellyfish are kind of like the Swarmers, where one of them, no big deal. When they do hit you, though, it slows you down and it breaks your shield pretty quickly. It deals damage over time, I believe, too, so that's really annoying. And with certain weapons, they're not that hard to deal with, but nonetheless, they are annoying, so another B tier enemy. Then we've got the Sand Shark, the Trawler. This is probably the least scary grabber enemy because you can definitely see the Sand Shark. It's very obvious when the Sand Sharks are around, and they're only in the Sand Blast Caverns, so you only have one map to worry about them on. They are one of the coolest enemies in my opinion, though. I think that they're really awesome looking, but they're probably still like another C tier enemy. Then we've got the Rollers. The small Rollers usually aren't that big of a deal. They can be really annoying. They can knock you out of position, and when there's a bunch of them spawned around, that's pretty bad, especially if you're trying to res people or get into position for an objective, or you're trying to like put down your shield as Gunner. They are pretty annoying. I think I'd put them up into like B tier, somewhere on the lower end of B tier. The bigger, the Queens, I think is what these are. These ones are much worse because they take up much more of an area. They hit harder. They can spit acid at you. They're tanky. They're just all around so annoying to fight. Probably A tier somewhere. Then we have the Radioactive Praetorian. I think the Radioactive Praetorian's the scariest out of the Praetorians. That being said, it's still usually just a damage sponge. It deals damage in an area, which makes it more dangerous because it can hit multiple people rather than like the Spit, where as long as you're not standing in front of the Praetorian, you're usually okay. With the radioactive one, it can hit you from all around. Same with when it dies, it leaves radiation, which can hit all around. So I guess I'd put them a little bit higher than the regular Praetorian. The Radioactive Exploder, kind of the same thing as the regular Exploder, although these ones move way faster, which could make them scarier. They're still not tanky at all, so one shot usually puts them down. Same with if you hit them in the head, they don't get to use their radioactive ability. Same goes with the regular ones. These ones, again, are probably more dangerous, and I'd put them higher than the regular Exploders. Then we've got the Spitballer. Spitballer is stationary, so you usually don't have to worry about it. However, it is a AoE attack that it has, and it has really long range. It can be really annoying to fight. They are very susceptible to fire, though, so you can burn them. I don't know. I've been sniped quite a few times by these and just killed because they'll do the same thing as Menaces. They'll follow you around a corner and then spit at you as soon as you come around it. So, I guess A tier, low end of A tier. Maybe B tier. I think B tier. Somewhere in the middle, I guess up here. I'll put them up above the Praetorians because they usually kill me more than Praetorians do, even though Praetorians are definitely tankier than these guys. Then we got the Stabber Vine, which is only in the Hollow Bow. Stabber Vines are actually really dangerous. They can hit you very hard, and they have a decent amount of HP, but they are stationary enemies too. So they're very similar to like the Spitballers or Nexus and stuff, or even Leeches. However, I think these deal the most amount of damage, and I feel like I should put them up into A tier next to the Leeches, because I have been pretty much one-shot by these. They also have a very high chance of just smacking you around, so you can be knocked off a cliff and die. That's happened to me a couple times. They're also really bad to figure out that something's trying to stab you during the middle of a horde. That's not fun either. Alright, and then we're moving on to the new robots, and our first one is the Blaster Turret, or the Burst Turret. This one shoots multiple shots at you. Its weak spot is right up here on the top of its head. This one, I don't know about this one. This one is kind of like the standard turret that attacks you regardless. It can deal a decent amount of damage to you, but so long as you're moving, you shouldn't get hit with more than 1 or 2 of the rounds. So long as there isn't multiple turrets around, they're usually not that bad. Again, they're another stationary enemy. Like low end of B tier, I think. And then we've got the Patrol Bots. Patrol Bots have a ton of HP. They're very annoying. They'll follow you around. They'll fly in very weird patterns. The weak spot is, again, the top of their robot head, I guess. Pickaxes do really high damage to them, same with melee weapons, so throw your axes at them and use your pickaxe power attacks. You can kill them pretty quick then. You can hack these and then have them fight for you, similar to the Betsy. These ones are probably A tier, because it's really annoying to have these just flying around and hitting you, especially during a swarm, because there's almost never just one of these around. There's usually like 2 or 3 of them, and they do have a substantial amount of HP. On the highest difficulty, they actually have 1,080 HP, so quite a bit more than a grunt. 10 times that of a grunt, actually. Then we have the Repulsion Turret. This one just puts up shields, knocks stuff back. This is not so bad. You can usually get close to it and hit it with a pickaxe, or you can stay at a distance and then just shoot at it. If there's nothing else around, they're complete pushovers. They're just going to take up a decent amount of your bullets, but yeah, probably like C tier somewhere here. Then we have the Shredders. Shredders are pretty much the same thing as like Swarmers. They are tankier than Swarmers, or like the Jellyfish. They're kind of a mix between these, where they'll fly around, they'll hit you, they'll deal decent damage to you, but you can kill them pretty easy with most weapons, or if you're using a weapon like the Loki, where you can just lock onto them and kill them at a distance. They also don't attack super often, so I don't find them as annoying as something like Swarmers, but I think like another C tier is where I'd put them. Then we have the Sniper Turret, which the Sniper Turret is probably the most annoying of the turrets, just because they're always at such a long distance, and certain weapons just don't do well against them. You really don't have much to fight them if you're playing Driller, just because you don't have long range. Same with if you didn't go with the Smart Rifle, you don't have much range usually, unless you're going with like Hyper Propellant on the Engineer. So not a whole lot there. They're very easy to take out if you're playing Scout. They're not too bad if you're playing Gunner. If you do have the Smart Rifle, they're not bad as Engineer, but they are rather annoying. That being said, they don't annoy me as much as like the Patrol Bots do. And they don't have nearly as much HP as the Patrol Bots do, so they're not that bad to take out a lot of the time. B tier so long as you're playing safe. If you want to play like aggressive and speedrun stuff, then they're probably like A tier, just because they're going to be focusing you more often. And then our last bot here is the Caretaker, which the Caretaker has a ton of HP. It is the boss robot. You can only fight this on the industrial sabotage missions. It can throw out the bombs at you. It has the tentacle arms that shoot at you and try to stab you, and can teleport and try to stab you if you try to run away and try to like safe spot it. It has the electricity around it. If you get too close, you'll get zapped. At least, well, that's up. It's got the multiple phases. It's got the giant shields on it. It's got just everything for a boss enemy. This one's going to be the top of S tier, because this one is probably the single toughest, or at least the single longest fight that you're going to have in Deep Rock. Provided you don't just run out of ammo or get a really unlucky spawn with like the Tyrant Weed or something like that. I think this is where I'd put all of the enemies in Deep Rock, at least as of right now. It's been interesting with the new update, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with how the list turned out. Tell me your least favorite or most favorite enemies to fight down in the comments below. I'd really like to hear that. Thanks everybody for watching this. I really do appreciate it. Special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube and my patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos like this And if you'd like to be a part of that, there are links down in the description. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!